Welcome to Biology Minds. Today we're going to talk about the different tissues of the human body. So within the human body there are many different types of tissues. The main four types that you need to know about are epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and neural tissue. Within those four types of tissues there are more specific tissues, but you need to understand that there are four main tissues, and throughout the course you're going to hear about these different tissues. Every chapter that we go through, or every body system that we go through, you're going to have at least one of these different tissues that we're going to deal with, and you need to understand the vital role that each one plays in the physiology. So epithelial tissue covers exposed surfaces, lines, internal passages, or mucous membranes, forms glands. Connective tissue fills the internal spaces, supports other tissues, transports materials, and stores energy. You have your muscle tissue, which does exactly what you think. It's going to move our body, skeletal muscle, pump our heart muscle, and then it also lines the walls of hollow organs. So those are specialized specifically for contractions, and then neural tissue is going to carry those electrical signals from one part of the body to another part of the body. So epithelia, that's the layers of cells covering internal or external surfaces. Anytime you hear this word epithelia or epithelium or epithelial, these are all talking about covering. So we're talking about skin, the lining of the mucous membranes. These are all epithelium. Glands are structures that produce secretions. When we talk about endocrine glands, they're going to secrete hormones, and those secretions are going to be the chemical messengers that drive certain things that are going to maintain homeostasis. So some characteristics of epithelia: you have cellularity, cell junctions, the way that the cells are going to come together in a specific way so that they are able to function properly. You have polarity, apical versus basal surfaces. So epithelia, there's always a top and there's always a bottom when we're talking about epithelia. There's always with the skin, there's always the outer portion and the inner portion. So that's what it means by polarity. Attachment, you're going to have it attached to this lower layer, which is often called the basal membrane, the basement membrane, or basal lamina, basal membrane. Okay, typically we think of them as being avascular. Okay, right, not a lot of vessels. So I always tell students, when you were younger, if you had a pin or something and you kind of put it through the top layer of your skin and you're like, hey, look, I'm not bleeding. All right, that's because it's avascular. That top layer of the skin does not have a lot of vessels. If you were to puncture lower layers, then obviously you start bleeding, and that is because it's more vascular as you get deeper down in there. All right, and then they have the regenerative properties where they're going to be able to, if you cut yourself, you scrape yourself, it's going to regenerate and you're going to form new skin. If you cut the inside of your mouth, right, pretty quickly you see that lining is going to regenerate itself or come back. Some functions, mainly physical protection. So we see that with epithelial tissue, it's there to protect us. It's kind of the barrier that's going to separate us from the outside. It's also on the inside. It's going to separate us from whatever it is that in our mucous membranes, and when we eat something, it's going to separate us from whatever we eat. It's going to separate us from the acid in our stomach. So it's really there for physical protection, for being that barrier. It also controls permeability, what's going to be able to be absorbed in the skin, what's going to be able to leave as far as sweating, provides sensation. So without our skin, we wouldn't be able to have a sense of touch or sense feel. You wouldn't be able to know, is it hot or cold outside? And then it also produces specialized secretions, which is more specifically the glandular epithelium when we're talking about specialized secretions. So maintaining the integrity of epithelia, intercellular connections, attachment to the basement membrane, epithelial maintenance and repair, these are all important in the integrity of the epithelium. There's different types of intercellular connections. You have cell junctions. The three that we talk about are tight junctions, gap junctions, and a big one are desmosomes. You have tight junctions between two plasma membranes, gap junctions, which allow for rapid communication. So these are big in communication. Held together by specific proteins, which we call channel proteins. And it allows ions to pass, or molecules, we could say, to pass through. And it coordinates contractions in the heart muscle. So you're going to see these gap junctions in the muscles of the heart. And then desmosomes, you have these cellular adhesion molecules. Okay, these are adhesives, adhesion molecules. Okay, dense areas, they're what we call intercellular cement. They're just going to make the cells stick together. And then there's different types. You have spot desmosomes, they tie the cells together, and then you have hemidesmosomes, which attach cells to that basal lamina or that basement membrane. When we talk about detachment to the basement membrane, you have a clear layer, you have a dense layer. These are visual representations of the different types. We have this diagram is showing all three of them, but more specifically, you have your gap junctions, you have your tight junctions, and then you have your desmosomes, which they show here, the two different types. You have your hemidesmosomes and then your spot desmosomes. When we talk about epithelia and the different types, there are three basic shapes to epithelia. You're either going to have a squamous shape, which is thin and flat. Okay, typically when we think of squamous, we think of that. This could be our little nucleus right here. And that would be a squamous cell. All right, some students like to remember it because it's squamish, sounds like squished. Okay, then you have cuboidal, sounds like cube. All right, these are cube-like cells. And then you have columnar. It's like a column. It's more rectangular. Okay, those are columnar cells. And then you have two different types based on how many layers there are. You're either going to have simple or you're going to have stratified. Simple is going to be one layer, single layer of cells, and then stratified is several layers of cells. So here's a basic representation of the different shapes. You have your squamous cell, you have your cuboidal cells, you have your columnar cells. And if we're only going to talk about one layer of this and one layer of this one, and this is even just one layer, even though it looks a lot bigger than other ones, this is referred to as simple. Okay? Opposed to simple, it's not complex, it's actually called stratified. So you have simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, and then you have stratified squamous, stratified cuboidal, stratified columnar. This is many layers of these types of cells. Simple squamous are great for absorption and diffusion because it's a very thin layer of cells, so things are able to diffuse across that layer of epithelium. You have mesothelium, which is a specific lining in the body, which is made up of squamous epithelium. If you ever hear of mesothelioma, okay, that's cancer of the mesothelium. Then you have endothelium. It lines the heart and the blood vessels. All of these are made up by squamous epithelium. This just shows you a representation, some information about where else you might find them in the mesothelium, pericardial, peritoneal cavities. All right, it's anywhere where you're going to see that you need to reduce friction, and you also want to control the permeability, what's going in, what's going out. It's great for absorption and secretion. You have squamous epithelium that is stratified, so it has more layers to it, protects against attacks. Keratin protein adds strength and water resistance. So if you ever hear about in like makeup commercials or lotion commercials, they talk about added keratin to help. This is to help the skin by having that protein, or help the hair by having that protein in order to strengthen it for water resistance. So you hear about in shampoos, they have keratin added to them. Well, that's to help strengthen the hair and help with water resistance in the hair. If that works, I don't know if it necessarily works, or they're just feeding that to us. But I know that they think if they're going to put that into their shampoo, it's going to help with those things. Then you have stratified squamous epithelial, so there's many layers to it. Like I said, uh, more we see it in the surface of the skin, the lining of the mouth, lining of the mucous membranes, the esophagus, the rectum, vagina. Provides physical protection, okay, against abrasions or scrapes, pathogens, chemical attacks. Then you have cuboidal epithelium. There's going to be the simple versus stratified. The simple cuboidal is great for secretion and absorption, where we have the stratified cuboidal, which is many layers of the cuboidal epithelium in sweat glands and mammary ducts. You have simple cuboidal epithelium in your kidneys for secretion and absorption. You're going to have stratified cuboidal in the lining of some ducts, good for protection, secretion, absorption once again. And then we have transitional epithelium. Okay, a different type of epithelium tolerates repeated cycles of stretching and recoiling and returns to its previous shape without damage. So that is great in the bladder. Okay, bladder is known to have transitional epithelium because it permits this expansion and recoil. So you're going to see this in the urinary bladder and even the renal pelvis or parts of the kidneys and the ureters. You have columnar epithelium, we have simple columnar, we have stratified columnar, but then we also have pseudo-stratified columnar, which actually have cilia attached to them. So that's what makes pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium different from the other columnar epithelium. And where we see these simple columnar epithelium, you see them in the lining of the stomach and the intestines, and they're good also for protection, secretion, absorption. Pseudostratified ciliated columnar, you're going to see these cilia, all right, not microvilli, not microcilia. You're going to see the cilia in the lining of the nasal cavity, the trachea, the bronchi, in the lungs. So this is big in the lungs, the trachea. Okay, it's going to help with move mucus whichever way that you want it. If you want mucus to remain out of the lungs, and this is great for that. You have stratified columnar epithelium, which is good for protection. Okay, you're going to find those in small areas of the pharynx, the epiglottis, which is the throat, the anus, mammary gland, salivary gland ducts, and even the urethra. There are two different types of glands that we talk about in this course. You have endocrine glands, which have ducts. I'm sorry, excuse me, don't have ducts. No ducts. They release hormones into interstitial fluid. And then you have exocrine glands, which do have ducts. So you have ductless, and then you have ducts. So exocrine glands are going to secrete things into these ducts, and then the ducts are going to bring these chemicals to a certain area. And you have endocrine glands, which are ductless. It's going to secrete hormones into interstitial fluid, and the circulatory system is going to carry these hormones throughout the body. Right. One thing to know is that the pancreas, everyone always thinks about the pancreas as being an endocrine gland, okay, because it secretes the hormone insulin, but it's also an exocrine gland because it secretes digestive enzymes. So good thing to know, pancreas is actually considered both an endocrine and an exocrine gland. There's different types of secretions. All right, you have merocrine secretions, apocrine secretions, holocrine secretions. Merocrine secretions are produced in the Golgi apparatus of the cells, released by vesicles. We talked about in the last chapter, exocytosis, releasing those enzymes, releasing those chemicals through vesicles. For example, sweat glands. Okay, apocrine secretions also produced in the Golgi apparatus, released by shedding the cytoplasm. Right, big example for this. Mammary glands, right? Mammary glands are apocrine glands or apocrine secretions. And then you have holocrine secretions released by cells bursting, killing gland cells. This is where we talk about sebaceous glands, all right? The oils in our skins those are holocrine secretions, right? The oils. All right, and these are the diagrams that are showing the merocrine secretions, the apocrine secretions, the holocrine secretions. Glandular epithelia types of secretions. You have serous glands, which are more watery, mucus glands, which secrete mucus or mucins, and then mixed exocrine glands, which secrete both serous and mucus secretions. Glandular structures, unicellular glands, mucus cells are the only unicellular exocrine glands that are scattered among epithelial. All right, excellent in intestinal lining. Multicellular glands, you have simple versus compound, tubular versus alveolar, and then you also have branched, all right, where several secretory areas are sharing one duct. Okay, these are different types of glands. You have simple glands where they're obviously less complex. Simple coiled tubular glands, simple branched tubular glands, simple alveolar or acinar glands, and then simple branched alveolar glands. And then you have more complex ones called compound glands, where we see compound tubular in male reproductive system in the testes. We see compound alveolar in the mammary glands, and then we see compound tubulo-alveolar in the pancreas as well as in the salivary glands. Now that we move past epithelium, we are going to talk about connective tissue. Okay, so remember we talked about epithelium, now we're going to talk about connective. We still have to talk about our muscular tissue or our muscle tissue, and then we have to talk about our nervous tissue. So connective tissue is specialized cells. All right, they have protein fibers in them, which are going to help create strength in them and also help them recoil or bounce back from being stretched. The fluid extracellular ground substance is a major part of the characteristics of the connective tissue, and then you have the extracellular components of the connective tissue, the fibers, the ground substances, the proteins that are within the connective tissue, which make up the matrix. Majority of that tissue volume really is those fibers and those proteins that are going to help really make that connective tissue what it is. Some functions of the connective tissue: establishing a structural framework for the body, transporting fluids, protecting delicate organs. All right, it is connecting things and it is supporting things. You have the different classifications. You have connective tissue proper, fluid connective tissues, which are there for transport. All right, so these you often might not think of as being connective tissues, but they are under that connective tissue umbrella. And then you have supporting connective tissues, for structural strength, different categories of connective tissue proper. So the connective tissue proper is the real name for the connective tissue that you often would think of as being connective tissue. You have loose connective tissue, all right, more ground substance, fewer fibers. So one example is fat, which we don't just call fat. In anatomy and physiology, we call it adipose tissue. So whenever you see this word adipose, you need to think of fat, all right? And then if you see something like adipocytes, okay, those are fat cells, okay? It has adipo in it. That means fat. So we don't really say fat just like in living environment. You don't say fat for the physical fat. You talk about lipids, all right? We don't say fat and oils, we say lipids. Well, now we don't talk about fat cells, we call them adipose cells or adipose tissue. And then you have dense connective tissue. There's more fibers, less ground substance, and one example would be tendons. All right, tendons, what do? Well, they connect bone to muscle or muscle to bone. And then you have ligaments, and they connect bone to bone. Connective tissue proper cell populations, there's different types. You have fibroblasts, fibrocytes, adipocytes, mesenchymal cells, macrophages, mast cells, lymphocytes, microphages, and melanocytes. Fibroblasts, the most abundant cell type. Fibrocytes, second most abundant cell type. Adipocytes, those are our fat cells. Mesenchymal cells are our stem cells. If you hear about stem cells, these are the cells that become other cells. Okay, so they're kind of like the undifferentiated version of cells that can then eventually become either fibroblasts or macrophages or whatever it may be. You have macrophages, which are part of the immune system. They're going to eat pathogens or invaders and any damaged cells that we want to break down so that they're not just sitting around lingering. And fixed macrophages stay in cells, and then you have free macrophages, which are migrating throughout the body through the circulatory system in order to kind of patrol the body in order to maintain your health as part of the immune system. Mast cells, they're going to stimulate inflammation after injury and infection. We're going to talk more about this as we go on through the year, but they release histamine, okay, which is responsible for allergic responses, and also release heparin, which we'll talk about more later in the year. Lymphocytes, also part of the immune cells. Macrophages, they're phagocytic. Talk more about those later. And then melanocytes, they're going to synthesize and store brown pigment, which we call melanin, which you all know about. Connective tissue fibers, you have collagen fibers. I'm sure you've heard about collagen. Reticular fibers, elastic fibers. Collagen fibers are the most common fibers in connective tissue proper. Long, straight, unbranched, strong, and flexible. Okay, resist force. And the examples given here are tendons and ligaments. Reticular fibers, okay, they're interwoven fibers, also strong and flexible, resist force in many directions. Stabilize functional cells, parenchyma and structures, for example, sheaths around organs, coverings of organs. And then you have elastic fibers, which contain elastin, all right, branch in many ways, and are wavy, and they return to original strength after stretching. Okay, so you have elastic ligaments within your vertebrae, and those are good for being stretched and basically beat up on by your vertebrae or by the bones in your back, and they're able to keep that strength and return to the way they should be. You have ground substance, it's clear, colorless, and viscous, and there's varying amounts of ground substance in the different connective tissues that we spoke about. This is just a general idea of connective tissue proper. You have embryonic, meaning in embryos. Embryonic connective tissue not found in adults has mesenchyme, all right, those stem cells, embryonic stem cells. First connective tissue in the embryo, and that mesenchyme is what becomes the other types of tissues in the body, or the connective tissue in the bodies. You have mucous connective tissue, loose embryonic connective tissue. Okay, once again, embryonic, not found in adults. Loose connective tissues, the packing materials of the body. There's three types in adults. Areolar, adipose, remember that's talking about fat. And then we have reticular. Areolar tissue, least specialized. Okay, a lot of elastic fibers hold blood vessels and capillary beds. For example, under the skin, the subcutaneous layer, where it is more vascular, is going to connect that subcutaneous layer to your blood vessels. Adipose tissue, different types of fat. There's white fat and there is brown fat. Okay, white fat's more common, but brown fat is more vascularized, has more vessels to it. Adipose cells, all right, you have adipocytes in adults. They do not divide. They expand to store fat. So we're going to store fat. Remember, fat is going to be good for cushioning and for energy. Shrinks as fats are released. Mesenchymal cells divide and differentiate to produce more fat cells. okay, when more storage is needed. Reticular tissue provides support, complex three-dimensional network, supportive fibers. Okay, reticular organs that we talk about with this reticular tissue, you have the spleen, the liver, lymph nodes, and bone marrow all contain this reticular tissue. This shows you areolar tissue, adipose tissue. These are the fat cells, not a lot to them. Okay, you don't see all these different organelles. It doesn't look too complex. It's really just cells with a whole lot of fat in them, a lot of lipids in them. And then you have your reticular tissue, dense connective tissue, different type of connective tissue. You have your dense regular, you have your dense irregular, and then you have your elastic tissue. Dense regular is going to be our tendons, our ligaments, and then our aponeuroses. Here's an example of the dense regular connective tissue within your muscles. They have collagen fibers, which are going to resist any force. Dense irregular connective tissue, layered in skin, around cartilages, around bones. All right, when it's around the cartilages, we call it perichondrium. So whenever we talk about the perichondrium that are around cartilages, that is really dense irregular connective tissue. So a lot of times no one is going to say, hey, you know the dense irregular connective tissue around the cartilage. They're just going to say the perichondrium. Same thing goes for around the bones. We call it a periosteum. We don't say, hey, you know about the dense irregular connective tissue around the bones? We just say the periosteum. So from here on out, you're probably going to, after this chapter, just hear about periosteum, perichondrium. You're not going to so much hear about people saying, oh, yeah, the dense irregular tissue in that area by the bone or anything like that. More capsules around some organs, such as the liver and the kidneys. You have a diagram of the dense irregular connective tissue. Elastic tissue is made of elastic fibers. Okay, for example, elastic ligaments of the spinal vertebrae. Another diagram showing you the elastic ligaments of the spinal vertebrae. Fluid connective tissue. So the connective tissue that you don't typically think about when we're talking about connective tissue, but blood and lymph is considered connective tissue. So when you talk about lymph or the lymphatic fluid, and when you talk about red blood cells, white blood cells, those are technically under the umbrella of connective tissue. So we have the 4 types of tissues, and if we're going to put every different type of tissue or cell into one of those 4 categories, well, blood and lymph are going to fall under the connective tissue category. All right, you also have your plasma or your extracellular fluid, your interstitial fluid. You have your lymph, you have your platelets. Okay, red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, lymph. These are all part of connective tissue. Cartilage and bones, they are also connective tissue. Cartilage, remember, is avascular, where bones are a little more vascular. So when you break a bone, oftentimes they're just going to reset that bone, make sure that it's aligned properly, and they're going to let it heal by itself because it has vessels that are going to provide it with nutrients and everything that it needs and remove any waste that it doesn't need there, and it's able to heal on its own. But when we talk about cartilage, it is avascular, lack of vascularity, less vessels, and it's not going to get the nutrients it needs. And that's why so many times, even if there's a slight tear to it, even if it's not completely torn, you're going to see that orthopedic surgeons are going to go in and they're going to repair that cartilage because it's probably not going to really do much. It's not going to be able to repair itself on its own. You have chondrocytes, those are our cartilage cells, and then lacunae are chambers that we're going to talk more about when we talk about bones and osseous tissue. Types of cartilage: hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, fibrocartilage, or fibrous cartilage. You have hyaline cartilage, which is stiff, yet flexible and supportive, reduces friction between bones, found in synovial joints. So when we think about our joints, we're usually thinking about synovial joints, also found in the tips of the ribs, the sternum, the trachea. You have elastic cartilage, supportive, but bends a little more easily than anything else, and is found in the external ear and the epiglottis. And then fibrocartilage limits movement, prevents bone-to-bone contact, pads knee joints, okay, and is found between pubic bones and intervertebral discs. So not as flexible as the other 2 types of cartilages, but also very important in kind of creating that barrier between one bone in the next bone. Here's hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage. They show you the external portion of your ear, so that auricle or that external ear is easy to move around. It's very flexible. That is elastic cartilage. And then you have fibrocartilage, which is a little bit more stiff, where we find in the intervertebral discs, the discs in between each vertebrae, which is important because it needs to resist that compression from having all the weight of your body on those discs all day, every day. And then we have bone tissue. All right, cartilage, bone tissue. We don't call it bone tissue usually. We're going to call it osseous tissue. Okay, strong, calcified, calcium salt deposit, resists shattering. All right, very strong. I've heard that some bones, such as our femur, is as strong as concrete. So bones are very strong. Okay, it's not like cartilage where it's going to be a little bit weaker and it's able to tear. Bones are very stiff and strong. Bone cells are called osteocytes. And then you have periosteum, which covers bone surfaces, fibrous layer, cellular layer that is going to help coat and create a covering to the bone, the osseous tissue or the bone tissue. This is a diagram. 4 types of membranes. You have mucous membranes, serous membranes, cutaneous membranes, and synovial membranes. We'll talk more about those as we go on. All right. So keep in mind, connective tissue provides strength and stability, maintains positions of internal organs. All right, so it's going to coat the organs, but it's also going to keep the organs in place where they're supposed to be. Provide roots for blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerves. You have fascia. It's the body's framework of connective tissue, layers, and wrappings that support or surround organs. Like I said, that fascia is that connective tissue that's going to surround organs and keep the organs where they're supposed to be, so that when you flip upside down, your intestines aren't all over the place and going everywhere. That fascia is important in making sure that you keep your organs where they are, where you want each one to be. 3 types of fascia: superficial fascia, deep fascia, and subserous fascia. It shows you right here where you have your superficial. Obviously, it is towards the outside, superficial. Then you have your deep fascia, inward more, and then below that is your subserous, all right, or subdeep fascia. Okay, our 3rd type of tissue, muscle tissue. You have skeletal muscle tissue, cardiac muscle tissue, and smooth muscle tissue. Skeletal muscle tissue is what you typically think of when you hear the word muscle tissue, but there's also cardiac muscle tissue found specifically in the heart, and then smooth muscle tissue, which you're going to find in your alimentary canal, your digestive tract, your blood vessels, your urinary bladder, your respiratory system, reproductive tract. Those are all the things that you're not actually thinking about controlling. All right, our skeletal muscle, we think, oh, I want to move my arm, oh, I want to move my leg, and you're controlling that voluntarily. All your involuntary movement, like the churning of your stomach, that is going to be through smooth muscle tissue. You have striated versus non-striated, meaning that it has lines to it. So striated would have these lines to it. Non-striated don't have those lines. Muscle cells can have a single nucleus, okay, or they could be multinucleate, have many nuclei, and then depending on the control, is it conscious, is it voluntary, or is it automatic involuntary, where I talked about how your skeletal muscle is going to be voluntary or voluntarily moved, and then you're going to have your smooth muscle tissue, which is going to be involuntarily. Diagram, you see it is striated, it has these lines, okay. Then you have your cardiac, where it has striations to it, but you also see that it has many nuclei to it, and it actually has these intercalated discs. So if it has intercalated discs, we know that that's a big one that's going to tell us, hey, this is cardiac muscle tissue. And then you have your smooth, which it doesn't have those lines, doesn't have those striations, and this is part of involuntary muscle movement. And then the 4th kind, lastly, is neural tissue. Okay, part of the nervous system. It's going to be in the brain, in the spinal cord. It's sending those electrical messages Okay, so opposed to the endocrine organs or endocrine secretions that are going to send out those chemical messages. These aren't chemical messages, these are electrical messages that are going to help control or maintain homeostasis. You have neurons, which are the actual nervous tissue cells, and then you have neuroglia, which are the supporting cells of the nervous tissue. And part of a neuron, I'm sure you've heard of this before, you have your cell body, your dendrites, and you have your axon, where the signal is going to be carried down. Diagram, all right, you have your dendrites right here, you have your cell body right here, okay, nucleus, nucleolus, we even have mitochondria in here. This is the axon where the signal is being sent down, okay, and then you're going to be able to connect to another neuron and continue that message as you move on to the next neuron through these pieces right here. All right, and then tissues respond to injuries. We talk more about this when we get into the integumentary system, but just understand that inflammation and regeneration are a major part of tissue repair. Inflammation involves swelling, redness, heat, and pain. You have different types of inflammatory responses, either trauma, meaning physical injury, or infection, meaning there's invaders, there are pathogens there, and we are trying to fight them off. Process of inflammation, damaged cells release chemical signals into the surrounding interstitial fluids, involves prostaglandins, proteins, and potassium ions. As cells break down, lysosomes release those enzymes that destroy the injured cell and attack surrounding tissues. Tissue destruction is called necrosis. So if you ever are in the nursing home or in the hospital and you see that people have a lot of necrosis, you see that their skin or that part is turning black, that means that the cells are dying, and usually, you know, there's no saving that tissue. We're hoping that we can regenerate new tissue and get rid of that necrotic area or that necrosis. Okay. Injury stimulates mast cells to release histamine, heparin, and prostaglandins, which we'll talk more about. And dilation of blood vessels increases blood circulation in the area, causes warmth and redness, brings more nutrients and oxygen to the area, and removes waste. So if you ever have inflammation and you feel like it's pounding, like it has its own heartbeat, that is because you have those dilated blood vessels and there's an increase of blood circulation to the area, so that we can have more nutrients and oxygen brought to it, and we can remove that waste and let the white blood cells take care of it. But it also, in the meantime, creates warmth and redness and that pounding. So plasma diffuses into the area, causes swelling and pain. The phagocytic white blood cells clean up the area. And then regeneration, when the injury or the infection is cleaned up, it's going to start healing. It's going to start fixing everything and making everything anew. New cells migrate into the area or are produced by mesenchymal stem cells. Okay, not all tissues can regenerate. Epithelial and connective tissues regenerate well, so our skin and our connective tissues, they kind of do a good job. But then you have cardiac cells and neurons that do not generate very well. So when neurons start to die off, we see that they don't really come back too well, which is why when you hear about people having brain damage, it's a long-term. They see long-term effects because it's not going to regenerate as well as if you just scraped your knee. All right, when we talk about aging and tissue structure, speed and efficiency of tissue repair decreases with age. Okay, because you have a slower rate of energy consumption or your metabolism. Hormones are different as you get older, and then you have reduced physical activity, really reduced health overall. And cancer rates increase with age. 25% of all people in the United States develop cancer. Cancer is the #2 cause of death in the United States. All right, environmental chemicals and cigarette smoke cause cancer. So environmental chemicals, I don't know how well we're doing with those necessarily. Okay, we always hear about more and more things in the news, how we're exposed to so many environmental chemicals, but cigarette smoke we have cut back on as a population, so that's helpful. As we move on from here, you want to think about these tissues as we go on through each chapter, each body system. We're going to continue to talk about the things that are in here. So this is just the tip of the iceberg as we dive into where we see each one of these tissues. But it's important to know that we have these 4 different types of tissues. right? We have our epithelium, we have our connective tissue, we have our muscle tissue, and we have our nervous tissue, and we are going to see them time and time again in each one of the body systems. All right, so keep these in mind and think about where you see these and what their importance is, and what really why they are the way they are, and what is their function as you move through the different organ systems of the human body.